the chair. Okay, got it. I forgot where I was. Sorry. This evening is our 10th presentation in our series of Can't Hide Behind Not Being Controversial. Our presentation tonight is the second part of our mental health series. We have a panel of two speakers, Jenny Farrell, which you'll see on the screen there, and Jordan Lindsay, which right there he is. And we have our very own Reverend Pollock, who will be our moderator. So before we begin, let's bow our heads in prayer. Ever-present peacemaker, we pray for this evening, for the time and the quiet to understand more deeply your hope for our lives. Be with Jenny and Jordan tonight. Help us hear and wonder at the deep needs that they address in our community. Give us the strength to attend to new ideas and think how we might support the work that will be presented. Thank you for our presbytery and for each person on this Zoom call. Be with us in our times of difficulty and affirm your presence each and every day. May we act justly as we crave peace in every aspect of our lives. All this we say to you through Jesus of Nazareth, who knows of what we speak and feel. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Ellen. I am Darren Pollock. I'm the pastor at Panorama Presbyterian Church and a member on the Communication and Church Support Committee that has been sponsoring this series. And some months back, when we were brainstorming different topics that we could talk about and just different interesting people that we have connections to, I thought independently of Jordan and Jenny, who I've described them as my two best friends that I'm not married to. And they have sort of the Venn diagram of what they do. There's an interesting intersection on mental health, but coming at it from very different directions and different backgrounds. And so as we talked through different ideas through the months, and we came to mental health, which is not necessarily controversial in the same way that some of the other topics that we've tackled have been. There are certainly controversial elements to mental health, but I would broaden Can't Hide Behind Not Being Controversial to include can't hide behind uncomfortable topics, because mental health can be sort of an uncomfortable topic to discuss, and obviously a huge topic, ranging from some more hidden forms of depression, anxiety, and more visible forms that can really disrupt one's ability to work, and everything in between. So it's a big topic. We know we can't cover everything in 2 months, but we looked last month at the clinical side, and Jordan and Jenny both work in fields that relate to mental health, but from different angles that have more to do with the policy side. And so Jordan is the executive director of the ARC of California. Jenny is the executive director of Mental Health Advocacy Services, or MHAS, as they call it. I will let each of them say more about what those organizations do in a minute, but I'm excited to be talking with you guys. I'm excited that we figured out a way to bring these two the fields that you work in and find a commonality, and the interchange that will go back and forth between you two. I think that we'll get some interesting insights into this topic. So I will, either one of you that wants to start. My first question is just, can you describe the organization you work for and the work that organization does, and particularly highlighting the mental health aspect of it? Jenny, would you like to begin? Oh, sorry.
Absolutely. Well, thank you all for having us. It's really a pleasure to be with you all. I go to Westwood Presbyterian Church in other news, and have also attended La Cañada and La Crescenta, and come check out Darren sometimes at his church. So it's great to be with you all. So mental health advocacy services, actually we pronounce our acronym MHAS, a little bit more German sounding. It's really an aggressive acronym. So we were founded in the 1970s, really in a moment where there was the beginning of this disability rights movement. And so the organization was a bunch of public interest lawyers who went into mental institutions and were trying to establish and fight for the rights of people being held in mental institutions, rights around what kind of medication they were receiving, starting to establish folks being able to really determine their own treatment plans. The agency has evolved over the last 40 years. So I'm an attorney. It's a legal services organization for folks with mental health disabilities. But rather than being focused on folks in mental institutions, currently we're really more focused on folks just living in community, living in apartment buildings, trying to get jobs at Target and CVS, and dealing with a lot of kind of the basic legal needs that folks have around negotiations with landlords, accessing public benefits that they're entitled to, appealing decisions that might be terminating those benefits at different times. We do some work around expungement and clearing people's criminal records and defending tickets that they may have gotten at various times in their life. We do a little bit of special education law as well. So that's a little bit about mental health advocacy services.
Great. Jordan.
Well, thanks so much for, first of all, it's nice to see you, Jenny. It's been a long time. And Darren, thanks for inviting me. And it's nice to be with all of you. And I think I was just supposed to spotlight myself, but missed that. If I need to do it again, let me know. Mm-hmm. And I'm the executive director for the ARC of California. The ARC of California represents family members and individuals of families who have intellectual or developmental disabilities. So a little different than mental health, but only different in the way that government classifies people and programs classify people, not necessarily different in the way as human beings. Intellectual and developmental disabilities, let's start there, mainly as, again, defined in some California law. We're talking about autism, Down syndrome, epilepsy, intellectual disability, cerebral palsy. And those individuals have had a long, obviously, history of social inequities and injustices, and until recently were often institutionalized. And the big push in the last couple of decades has been to close institutions and to bring individuals into the community, working next to us, living next to us, socializing with us, going to school with us. And that is what the ARC advocates for. And we have 23 chapters across the state that are service providers. So they're the ones actually providing various services such as supported living or day programs or respite services to the families, or independent living services, a whole host of services that our chapters provide. And my role, though, and our role is really, as Darren was talking about, and same with Jenny in her role, is sort of systems advocacy. We do a little bit of the individual advocacy that Jenny's organization does, working with individuals directly and trying to help individuals access services, know what their benefits and their rights are. And I wish I had more staff to do more of it, but we mostly focus on state and federal legislation, policy, budget advocacy to ensure that services and supports for Californians with intellectual and developmental disabilities and their families are adequately funded, fighting for civil rights, and fighting for human rights at times as well for the community.
Great. Thanks, Jay. I should note also that if any of of you watching have questions, we'll try to have some time at the end where you can ask those. And then I will include Jordan and Jenny, both of you, in that too, where if there's a question that you have for the other one, feel free to interject on that. And as we see different themes emerge, we've already seen a theme of the movement from institutionalization to community, and whether it's mental health issues in the classic sense, or mental disabilities, the benefits of different incorporation into community. Both of you have come to this field from different fields. Neither of you are trained at a graduate level in psychology or social work. Jordan comes from nonprofit, government agency kind of side, and Jenny comes obviously from the legal side. So I'm curious, what was it that drew you into this field of dealing with mental health, intellectual disability? So how did you find your way here? We can start with Jordan, since we could do the, like how they do a draft sometimes, where you pick 1, 2, 2, 1, 2.
Thanks, Aaron. So 95% of the people in this line of work are family members and of a person with intellectual or developmental disability, a brother or a sister, or usually a parent. I am not. And so sometimes a little bit of an outlier in that. Definitely had exposure growing up with a cousin who had significant cerebral palsy, and other experiences that we all had at school. But often when we were growing up, you know, those kids were on separate side of campus that you never saw, right? They're out there picking up trash while we were at recess. So not a family member. You know, people ask me this question all the time, and I feel like maybe I can answer it a little more frankly with this group than you know, many others, because you might know some of the people I might mention. But there was a time in my life where, as we're all very influential when we're like 17, 18, you know, and I knew that this was a community that I just was kind of naturally drawn to. I read the book Can You Drink the Cup by Henry Nouwen at the exact time that I was starting to figure out what the heck I want to do with my life. And he talks about his time in what ultimately is sort of an institutional-like setting, but nonetheless, it's still LIARC. It's a popular one, and how that transformed him. And then, to make a long story short, I had a pretty transformative experience in Guatemala at an institution that I kind of stumbled across. And then as soon as I left Guatemala to go back to UC Davis, I sought it out, and I want to work, I want to do this. And I got a minimum wage job as a respite worker. I did that many hours a week during my undergrad, and fell into behavioral psychology. I was loving it. And then it just kind of carried me from there into when I moved up to Sacramento. I knew that it was something I cared a lot about. I was in Sacramento. I kind of was also getting interested in politics and policy. And so why not try to make the most of it? And I was lucky to get a job in the Capitol. And so I was able to combine sort of my passion for the community and these individuals and these families that ultimately my faith drew me there, is the real answer, is to support and help and do what I can for those individuals in that community, and then kind of combine that with my interest in policy and politics.
Great. So even the organization, the ARC, has a linguistic connection to Henry Nouwen's LARC Daybreak community. I like that.
Yeah, exactly. Yep.
Great. Jenny.
So I think that what drew me to this organization was a personal connection, in addition to, generally being part of the legal aid community, which is all about kind of providing free legal services to low-income folks, and about the concept that our justice system, both our civil legal system and our criminal legal system, because I sometimes have a hard time calling that the criminal justice system, that, you know, it's fundamentally not fair that people who have access to a lot of wealth can afford a lawyer and then achieve better legal outcomes than people who don't. And so that's really been what I've been involved in as a lawyer. And then the last 2 years, it was really just a job that opened up at this agency called Mental Health Advocacy Services that I came to. But I was specifically drawn to it from personal experience with having started, you know, wrestled with anxiety and depression myself ever since adolescence. I've been on a low dose SSRI since then. I've benefited hugely from therapy. When my first child was born, I experienced some postpartum depression and postpartum anxiety and a touch of postpartum psychosis, which Darren can attest to, because he actually came to I just remember them coming over one day and like the TV was on and I was like, I don't know, man, like the TV's talking to me. Like I definitely had some hallucination and some psychosis going on, looking back on it and learning more about it now. So yeah, I mean, I think all of that, it's just incredibly common and luckily now more talked about, but traditionally has been such a stigmatized topic. And so it's something that I'm, you know, I absolutely can relate to the clients that we serve personally, that, you know, I had great access to healthcare. I could call up like Google, you know, when I was going through my postpartum issues, like literally my brother Googled, like, is there a good postpartum psychiatrist in West LA? And like, of course there is, there's like the best one. And I could just have the resources to like use crisis funds to pay out of pocket to go see her and get on the path that I needed for recovery. But if I didn't have access to that family support and financial resources, who knows where I would have ended up. So I absolutely see it as a, you know, but for the grace of God, go I situation with the clients that we serve.
Yes, I can definitely see Augustine or Augustine fitting into that narrative very well. Next question. Jordan, you touched on this with your answer. I'd like to know, both of you being Christians, how your faith impacts the work that you do. And Jordan, you talked about your faith being a primary thing that drew you into the work. And I can see that being a reason, Jenny, why you are drawn to those who are denied justice, being kind of in your bones. But more on maybe on a day-to-day basis, both working for groups that are working for justice, which is such a strong biblical theme, but working in secular organizations doing that. How does your faith impact the work that you do? Whoever wants to jump in can.
So Darren sent us the questions ahead of time, and I, of course, was looking at them like 30 minutes ago for the first time, and, in true Darren fashion. And, you know, it's funny because I think as I have, I've been doing a lot of Richard Rohr reading over the past year and a half, and I get the daily Center for Action and Contemplation emails. And I don't know if it's that influence, but it's hard. I actually don't really think anymore about it as like, how does my faith impact my work? Or how is my church life with my secular life? Like it really is all blended for me. And so there isn't, you know, where Church Jenny stops and Executive Director Jenny starts, although, you know, technically I'm funded by the government, so I don't talk too much about Jesus at work. But it doesn't really matter whether I talk about Jesus or not, right? It's how I'm leading my staff, and how I'm serving the clients, and that's all that really matters. So I hope that it's all one consistent story.
Mhm.
And, you know, I think the other thing I'll say is just, you know, in that same episode that I had postpartum, my pastor at the time, Lynn Cheney, who I don't know if any of you know her, but she's pretty awesome. And, you know, I was in a real dark space, and she was like, Jenny, like, there's something about those dark spaces and those caves, you know, where the spirit is. And I think that mental illness and mental health disabilities, there can be some really transformative, there can be a lot of pain, the worst pain of the person and of the parent and child and sibling and all the folks that Jordan mentioned. But I think, you know, there's just more to being human than all of us just being one neurological way. And there's the folks who can really, I don't know, I'm kind of rambling because it's kind of a hard thing to describe, but I think you guys get what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, one thought with that, I think you're right in that it's good to get to a point where you're not really having to think constantly about how should my faith impact this. Like hopefully it's more sort of woven into your being so that you act that way. But I can think of sort of a parallel to prayer, where Paul tells us to pray without ceasing. And that's kind of the acting with that kind of faith integrity, so that it's just naturally what you come to do, but then also taking time from time to time to think, you know, sit down and think, well, how does my faith impact, or look back on the past month and say, are there things I should have done differently based on my faith? So sort of a mix of it comes out naturally and setting aside time to reflect on that question and to assess how things are going.
And I just want to clarify that, like, I'm not saying I'm an awesome Christian by any stretch of the imagination. It's more like what little spirituality and faith I have is consistent across all realms of my life.
Sure. No, it didn't come across as exalting yourself. I think it makes sense that, you know, it flows out in a certain way. Jordan, would you like to you mentioned, you started to talk about getting you into this field and influences you had in your late teens. Can you say more about on a day-to-day, week-to-week basis, how your faith informs what you do?
Yeah, you know, I think informs is a good word, and I have to kind of align myself with what Jenny was saying, where there's definitely, very rarely, for better or for worse, I don't know if it is, which way it is, but there's no real often acute things like I should pray about this right now, or I should like how should I respond in this as a Christian in this, you know, situation. I rarely think like that. I think that what I think it's more kind of what Jenny was saying as well. You know, one thing is that I'm in politics, like deep in politics, and it can be a pretty unethical profession at times, and only because you're out to get what you want and to build power. And so I think it's just that my faith has informed how I transact with people day to day, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so you know, I think I try to be humble. I try not to seek the power personally. I'm going to talk about power later, but my own personal power in situations is not what I'm trying to seek. I'm not trying to you know, outperform somebody. Just trying to live out and act out what has kind of been ingrained in, like the woven into me, as the word you use.
Right. On the politics side, I remember when you were working early on in the Capitol and kind of explaining to me some of the deal making that goes on, and it helped me to see how messy politics is, where you can have a really noble thing you're advocating for, and the only way you're going to get someone else to vote for it is if you vote for their thing. And it's a good parable of the messiness of this world and how hard it is to try to be an ideologue, even if it's a Christian ideologue in many contexts that we find ourselves in.
Yeah, totally.
Not that I would advocate. I mean, I would use some different term. I guess consistently Christian in every decision you make. I guess I wouldn't really advocate for being even a Christian ideologue, because that would lean towards kind of fundamentalism. Yeah.
You bring up that type of scenario, and I would say like the one thing that consistently brings up an acute like what should I do as a Christian here is in those horse trading moments. Like you give me this if I'll give you that, or vice versa, whatever it is, and it's like I need to pause. I need to think about this, and what is the right thing to do here?
Yeah, I can imagine that. We even get that in the church, between different committees, where it's like, we'll approve your spending for this if you approve your story. I mean, it's exaggerated a little bit, but you find that even at Presbytery, where it's
Politics
there's
isn't only
politics.
in politics. Politics,
believe it or not. Yeah. Sometimes you need to kind of support something that you're not terribly passionate about, so that someone else will support something that you're passionate about. I had a question that came in. I'll work it in now, from Ruth, and I'll throw this to both of you. Ruth was wondering how, for Jordan, how the different arcs through the state responded to different challenging circumstances that you found your clients in over the past, during the course of the pandemic. And were there any new challenges that you found come up in that time, and how do you address that? And then Jenny, if you have anything to say about that, on how the pandemic kind of impacted the people that you work with too, then you can follow up on that.
Yeah, I imagine Jenny will have a lot. I feel like this has been the trigger of all triggers, the pandemic. On the mental health side, it's just been.
We talked a lot about that last month. Yeah, that was our focus last month on the clinical side.
The mother of all triggers was COVID. Thank you for asking that, and that's a really thoughtful question. It's impacted people incredibly, because individuals for various reasons, variety of reasons, some have complex medical conditions. Individuals with developmental disabilities were 6 times more likely to die if they contracted COVID. So there was a hyper awareness around. First, we went into protection mode and keeping people safe, but then that became an isolation issue, and then we had to move into mental health challenges when people are literally, they couldn't leave their group home. I mean, and parents couldn't visit them in their group home. Adult children could not have contact, couldn't visit, have visitation for 6, 7, 8 months. And then staff was a huge challenge as well, because how do we keep not just the group homes, but other types of supports and services staffed, just like kids and students isolated at home with not going into their community at school anymore. Same was a lot with our community. If they had a day program they were going to, or a job they were going to, or volunteering they were doing in the community, now they're at home. Some Zoom does not work. So it was a complex. I and others went into just lockdown. Like, how do we, just like every parent, I mean, we did it at our house too. We got 3 kids at home. How do we do this? We have no school now. What are we going to do? And that was sort of a statewide problem. Like, what do we do? Oh my gosh. And we were very fortunate that the state provided a lot of flexibility on how we could deliver supports and services. We first were arguing for PPE, like everybody else in the world. We need PPE. Then we were arguing about hospital visitation. Well, actually, then we were arguing about and lobbying for that hospitals in the medical world cannot triage based on quality of life indicators. If there's only a certain number of oxygen tanks, who gets it? And we were successful in saying that hospitals could not use a quality of life indicator in that. And then finally, it was hospital visitation rights, that if you were a person with severe behavioral challenges or something else that needed a parent or an attendant with you in a hospital, that even though hospitals weren't allowing anybody in, we finally were or given the right for people to have an attendant with them in the hospital. So it was just one thing after another, like everybody, right? It was just one thing after another, and adapt and figure out what to do that's best for the community. I'm happy to say that our contraction and mortality rate, I hate to speak of it so in such a data way, but we were lucky in California to keep it pretty low in our community, because one outbreak, staff go from home to home, from service to service.
Yeah.
And it could have spread like wildfire. So we're lucky it didn't.
That's great. I know with Carter, our 2-year-old, having chronic lung disease from his prematurity, our local regional center advocated for us to get the vaccine earlier than we would have otherwise, so that we wouldn't be bringing it home to him. So we appreciated that work. Jenny, do you have a comment on that?
I would say for us, as legal aid lawyers, one thing we're looking at is all these eviction moratoria on the local and state and federal level. And we've all, they were going to expire at one point. Now they've been pushed off a little bit longer, but everyone is kind of bracing themselves for going over this quote unquote eviction cliff, where people have been protected. And then at some point, though, there were going to be evictions prior to COVID. We were already in an affordable housing crisis, and we're in a homelessness crisis, and we had some protection, but people didn't really know how to navigate those. They heard like, oh, I hear I can't be evicted right now. Well, but you still have to provide, proof to your landlord about how you lost your job due to COVID. And so, getting that information out to people and helping people understand kind of how those different regulations were interacting, and now kind of continuing to help people figure out, well, what is their plan, post these moratoria expiring if they still haven't gotten new income. So that's kind of been our biggest kind of way that COVID has impacted our services.
Yeah, that's another, or can be another messy one with the evictions for small landlords. Can be a hard thing for them. I know that the larger the landlord, the easier it is to side with those who might be evicted. But I know that there's situations where there's not an easy kind of answer to that.
Well, most of the bills, that that have been addressing this do provide relief also for small landlords. So it's both for renters and smaller landlords. They get mortgage relief and
okay, good. I'm glad that that's been addressed. The next one, this is one that I kind of gave you a little heads up on. I know you both run into circumstances where things just feel beyond your control, where there is no course that seems like it can fix what you want. If you had a genie come to you and offer you one wish to either make your job easier or the work that your organization does more effective, what wish would you submit to make things a bit easier for you?
Jenny, what do you got?
right to housing and homelessness.
Say it again.
Right to housing.
Okay.
Adequate housing for all. So like the magic wish version of that is like just end homelessness. There's adequate housing supply and adequate resources to cover the cost of housing, which are two slightly separate things.
Mm-hmm.
And so, there's a lot of talk in the community around, really establishing a right to housing, the same, we do in our country. If someone meets a certain qualification, they go on food stamps. We provide public education to everyone. We provide a lot of public infrastructure. We do not guarantee housing in this country. Only about a quarter of the people who qualify for Section 8 housing get it. Versus if you qualify for Medi-Cal, Medicaid, you qualify for food stamps, you just get it automatically. It's a guaranteed benefit. And we don't do the same with housing. So there is talk of upping that a little bit. And I think that would be a great thing, because it feeds into what we refer to as like a housing first model, that someone can have all these problems. They can have substance abuse problems, they can have mental health problems, and you can create all these services to address that. But if they're living on the street, it's going to be very, the outcome of all of those great services is going to be just kind of cut at its knees. But if you get someone stable, get someone into a home, then all those other things you're doing can have kind of a proportionately larger impact.
Seek ye first housing for all, and all these things shall be added unto you. Yeah. And I realize this question sounds a little bit like a Miss America kind of thing, and that's certainly a more nuanced answer than you would expect from a contestant. But I think that it can be helpful to think, maybe you throw out that genie thing, and someone else has a way to make that closer to being a reality. And when we sort of have these moonshot ideas, Jordan, what would you ask your genie?
I loved you sending us this question, and it sent me down a little bit of a hole here that so please just be gracious with my train of thought here. My answer is power, and lots and lots of power. Not for me, of course, but for individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities as a community.
And empowerment.
No, not empowerment.
No, okay.
Empowerment.
Like literal power.
Power. I feel like empowerment is self-empowerment.
Okay.
I'm talking about power. And political power to make people do what you want them to do. Because if they don't, there will be consequences. That's the real, there's types of power to have. That's the strongest type of power to have.
Yeah.
And it made me think, I'm going to say that to a bunch of church people. And then I realized, I started thinking about it more and more. And, what I think about 20 times a day from my work is power. And I was right before this, the reason I was late. I mean, every phone call, every meeting I have, I'm saying, who has the power in this room? How does our community get more power in this situation, so that people with intellect, not so that a rich guy can get richer, so that people who have felt the ills of social inequity and social injustices for hundreds of years can flip the table. And I started thinking, in terms of, biblically as well. Like, I feel like the Bible says a lot about, including the Gospels, and this is what, it's in these moments where I email Darren usually and be like, dude, tell me, what does the Bible say about this? And I feel like it says a lot about what to do for the least of these, but it doesn't say a whole lot if you are the least of these. It doesn't say nearly as much in my mind. And how you don't become the least of these. And are you supposed to say the least of these, or are you supposed to fight like hell so you're not the least of these anymore? If you're the Samaritan on the side of the road, can a bunch of Samaritans organize and say Samaritan lives matter and no longer be considered second-class citizens anymore? This tells us how to treat the Samaritan, doesn't tell us what the Samaritan should do a whole lot in the Bible. And I wish it did more, because then, and maybe it does, and I just don't know it. That's when I call Darren. Because then we would have a clear roadmap of how those who face social injustices are to overcome that. Turn the cheek, but I feel like that's more personal. I'm not going to tell people who continue to feel injustices to turn the other cheek. In fact, I'm doing the exact opposite. And I feel like I am right in my faith to do so. I am telling people to swing back way harder than they swung. And first, before you do that, you have to learn how to punch. Before you learn how to punch, you got to get a really strong arm. And for that, it's like, first, let's organize. Let's get hundreds of thousands of individuals who know how to be actively politically, their families, people with disabilities themselves. Now let's go straight to the gut punch, which is voting. And how do you get more power then? Let's get money to do some of these activities so that you can get a job just like anybody else can get a job, or you can find housing just like it. So that's a very long answer to power is my answer. And it led me to think a lot more about what the Bible has to say about that. And anyway, that's my answer.
Yeah, it's great. I think you're generally right. There's a big debate for ages on the Sermon on the Mount on whether it concerns personal or social ethics. And I think on things like turning the other cheek, you'd have to ignore a lot of what the prophets say and a lot of what Jesus says elsewhere, to the scribes and the teachers of the law about justice, to say that at the systems level, oppressed people are to turn the other cheek. And then the other thought that comes to mind with that, the example that I use sometimes of, when you said Samaritan Lives Matter, of a group that is oppressed, is the way in Acts the Greek widows are addressed with the formation of the deacons, where there's this subsection of widows, ethnic subsection, that are being overlooked in the distribution of food. And the way that the church responds is at the systems level. It establishes a group that we have to this day, the ordained ministry of the diaconate, and they are tasked with addressing that injustice. That example doesn't necessarily address the Greek widows to say what they are to do, but at least gives the church a systems level way to address an injustice. But I think we could talk more later about I think of Jesus with the Samaritan woman at the well, and maybe kind of reflect on how he gives her power and what he calls her to do. But that's a good question, though. I like that way of thinking. So mental health issues are not necessarily controversial, although we've seen through the cracks some ideas that could be on that controversial end. But this question maybe would poke at controversial aspects a little bit more. I want to hear from both of you. When you think about mental health or intellectual disabilities as it relates to that, because there's a lot of similar injustices, what makes you most angry? Whether it has to do with legislation or popular impressions or individual stories, what's something that just makes your blood boil when you think about this topic? And whoever, yeah.
One thing that leapt out to me when I was thinking about this is our criminal legal system, which I will not call the criminal justice system. I think about a client of ours who has schizoaffective disorder and was off his meds, and he says this is the dumbest, he's so ashamed of this incident, and it just kills me that he's ashamed of this incident when we as society should be ashamed of how we responded to this incident. So he's off his meds and he's on the bus, and he's got these like worn down shoes, and he sees this man sitting across who has these really nice leather shoes, and he's in the middle of a psychotic breakdown, and he's like, hey man, can we trade shoes? And the guy's like, okay. And later then is like, I felt threatened, but is like, yeah. And then they trade shoes, and then the bus driver calls the cops, and then the cops come, and our client is like, yep, that was me, I'm the one who traded shoes, I needed new shoes. And they arrest him, and he goes to jail for a year on a felony grand theft charge. I mean, come on, like that is, and that's why Twin Towers, LA County Jail is known as the nation's largest mental health institution, because there's so many people in there who, you know, have mental illness and mental health disabilities. So, yeah, that story gets me riled up, because, you know, what a waste of public resources.
Yeah.
And how is that going to help this person to spend a year? Incarceration is highly traumatizing. If you didn't have a mental illness before going to jail, you were going to emerge with at least PTSD, if not other mental illnesses. So yeah, that, I think, you know, there's a lot of great folks working to change that and working to figure out, you know, we do now have mental health court in Los Angeles to try and divert some folks away from just your standard criminal legal court, but it's still a huge problem.
I texted you something of along this lines question yesterday, and I know you don't work in criminal law, but when you say that this client was off of his meds, what is there a different, like, how do I ask this? Is there a different kind of liability if someone is off their meds versus either being on their meds or not knowing that they need meds yet? And how do you encourage someone to stay on their meds if they need them to keep from having episodes like that?
So
without saying that under any circumstances would be a helpful response to send this guy to prison for a year. So I'm not saying that, you know, that was the right thing to do. I'm just wondering about that piece of it.
And so I should also have finished the story that, so we don't serve folks who are currently on a 5150 hold or who have been arrested. That's not our clientele. We served him 5 years later with
I see. Okay.
record, so that he
got it.
Then get a job that he was otherwise going to be disqualified from because of having a felony grand theft conviction on his record.
Got it. That makes a lot of sense.
Our service to him was the post-conviction relief work. I don't practice criminal law. You texted me that question yesterday, and I said Google the answer to how, how various judges may.
Yeah, right.
You know, I you know, all I can say is that, and I'll just not answer the question by bringing up something else that I wanted to give Jordan kudos for if he was part of this. I know there's been funding now for a lot more peers in the state of California. And I don't know if Jordan was involved in securing that funding or not, but you know, that, from what I understand, peer-to-peer, when you're talking about trying to get someone on medication, having their parents tell the adult child, you need to do this, even having a psychiatrist, you know, different power structures, getting it back to Jordan's thing about power, may or may not be the most effective, but that peer-to-peer, I've been through this is what helped me, you know, let's try this out, has proven to be the most effective way to help folks. And so the state of California is investing in hiring a lot more peers, peer navigators in our local mental health departments. So I think that'll be a really good thing.
Great. Jordan.
You know, similar to Jenny, it's the individual stories, you know, it's not the systemic wrongs that get me so mad. It's like Joe, who, you know, some guy tripped him on purpose while he was walking down the street, my buddy. You know, it's like, it's these individual that still this day and age, right? Like still. And I think that, you know, society's outlook on people with disabilities is about 20 years ahead of people's and society's acceptance of people with mental health challenges. So I acknowledge that we've come a long way, and I should say society has come a long way in the you know, accepting people with disabilities, but still not far. That's like, man, like the inexcusable behaviors that some people still have and actions towards people who are just different. And that can be said for a lot of people who are different. And that just gets that's what gets my blood boiling, is when it's at an individual level, somebody who's just wrong, somebody who's just a jerk to somebody because they have a disability and for no other good reason. We deal a lot in hate crimes as well. We deal a lot in sexual violence. All those things are, build up as part of this. It's just thinking of somebody is less than or other than, and treating them that way. That's what gets me really mad.
Great. I have kind of my final question that I want to bring up in a minute. Anne asked a question in the chat box about veterans, and obviously for both of you, there's a lot of veterans that come home with disabilities, many physical and mental. And then from the mental health aspect, of course, a lot of PTSD. And I know the Vietnam in particular had a lot of chemicals and various things that would create lasting impacts. Could each of you speak briefly about if there's anything that your organization does to focus on the needs of veterans as it pertains to what you guys do? I know there are veterans organizations also that focus largely on this. Think of Jake Wood and Rubicon that would tie in to that in giving a purpose and using what they've learned. But can you speak to that, either of you?
Well, for us, it's not a whole lot. I mean, traumatic brain injury, TBI, is one of the only areas that we really see in veterans, and TBI is part of the disability community. Unfortunately, as systems are bifurcated and separated, TBI does not fall under the definition of intellectual and developmental disability in California. So just the way systems go, I don't work on a lot of TBI issues, but so no, not a lot.
Okay.
I just took that opportunity to put our website and phone number in the chat. Because yeah, I mean, we do serve veterans with mental health disabilities who have legal needs, whether it's, housing issues, benefits issues, and we can provide referrals if it's something else that we don't deal with.
Great. So the last main question that I have is sort of our take home, the charge and benediction that you might have for us. What are things that the church can be doing to advocate for those with mental health issues or disabilities? What are things that we can do to be supportive? I imagine that part of this answer, one of our big takeaways from our part one last month, was addressing the stigma of mental health. And that was kind of the big thing that both of our counselors who are at the clinical level wanted the church to work on, that the stigma part. So that might be part of your answer, but what are some things that the church can do to aid in this area?
Great question. And I would say a few things after I had a little bit of time to think about it. One is obviously consider the access to your church. Think about your church and educate yourself on, and I mean deep education, happy to provide some resources about how individuals with a variety of intellectual or developmental disabilities interact in certain situations. Does your church, can a person who has extreme sensory issues and sensitivities attend your church? Can a person with extreme physical mobilities attend your church? Can they even get up the stairs? Can a person who is deaf, can a person who is blind attend your church and still be served and still have a moment of worship? So a variety of things to consider, and that's a challenge. There's a lot of things to consider there. Second thing I would say is put individuals with disabilities prominently in your church. Involve them and make sure that it is a welcoming space, but also a welcoming space to be a leader. And that leads to my third one is don't give them volunteer opportunities. I'm more than that, hire them, give them a job. Don't patronize with kind of a paternal instinct. It's just a brother and sister with capabilities that can serve your church. And so, think about it and hiring them, or think about plugging them into some really fantastic volunteer opportunities to be a leader in your community.
Great. Thanks, Jay.
Those are great suggestions from Jordan. And yeah, I mean, I did want to say something on the destigmatizing thing, which I'm sure you all covered last time, but I do love it when I'm at a church where they're doing the prayers and the pastor like specifically says like, and we're praying for people with anxiety and depression, or praying with people with bipolar, we're praying for people experiencing intimate partner violence, we're praying for people experiencing eating disorders, because there is someone in the pew statistically, if not multiple people in the pews, who are experiencing those things. And so to just name them is so powerful, I think. But yeah, I mean, I think you just have to figure out what you want to do, if you want to work with people, like there are lots of people with mental health disabilities in jail. So you can go visit people in jail and you will be providing support to people with mental health disabilities. There are a lot of people with mental health disabilities experiencing homelessness. So to the extent that you are involved in, advocating for housing and affordable housing, those are important issues. We talk about the like jail to hospital to street cycle for low-income people with mental illness. So to the extent you can intervene in any of those three places and provide love and support and resources, I think you will be doing good.
Dan, could I add?
Yeah, please.
I feel like I have to take the opportunity also to tell the church what not to do.
Yeah, that's actually that's a great question. Yeah,
because the church has a very poor history of some interactions with people with developmental disabilities. Do not say that, oh, you're such a gift from God, oh, you're a little angel, you're our angel, your disability is a gift. No, it's not. Don't say that. Don't say, it's such a blessing to have you here. I know a lot of people with intellectual developmental disabilities that are raised hell, and they're terrible people, and they are not little angels. I go drink with them, and they cuss and they scream and they're angry and they're mean. Disability does not make you an angel. Do not pat anybody on the head if they're in a wheelchair. Just don't do that either. And don't pray for somebody to be healed. Don't ever do that. Don't ever do that. So those are a few things which the church has got wrong in the past. So people don't need to be healed they're not going to be healed from autism, right? So don't pray for that. Pray for support and peace in the family. Divorce rates for parents who have a kid with an intellectual and developmental disability are astronomically high, 90% or so. Pray for that family. So those are a few things of what I encourage you not to do, which may be counter to some of the things that, healings and different things the church has thought of. But the one that, man, there's a whole industry of cottage industry of t-shirts that say like, I'm not your little angel, or don't pat me on the head, or something like that, of people with disabilities. And it is one thing that turns people with disabilities away from the church really fast.
Sure. The angel thing is also an ontological confusion, because humans and angels are different beings. So you see that same mistake when people die and you say there's another angel in heaven, and you're like, no, you don't become something ontologically different when you die. You're still a human. Second thought on that, one of the things you talk about in seminary is, there's even like kind of a joke or a saying that most of what you learn in seminary is the stupid things not to say in crisis moments. And so that's a helpful way to think of it. Like, what are the wrong things to do? And then the piece about the disability being a gift, that's a hard one. And I know that there's literature on resurrection bodies and what a resurrection body is like for someone, particularly with a physical disability. To what degree is that disability part of the person's identity that is continuous, and to what degree is it a way that sin has affected creation? And I don't think there's necessarily an easy answer. You think of Jesus carrying his wounds in his resurrection body, for what part of our identity carries over into the resurrection body. But it's I can see that being a really hurtful thing to say, to say that someone's the thorn that they carry is actually a blessing in some way. Jenny, do you want to have anything that the church just stupid things that the church can avoid doing?
Well, I think Jordan makes great points. And I also think that a lot of people have different preferences. And that's the only way, just myself coming into this field in the last couple of years, I've been trying to learn the lingo. And,
Sure,
I default to what we call people first language. So I would say people experiencing homelessness, people experiencing mental health disabilities. But there are absolutely people with mental illness who are like, no, I'm disabled. Like that is my identity. And so you just ask people, like, I don't know. I mean, I know my cousins, like they lost their children as teenagers, and they do think of them as angels. Now, I would never go up to them and be like,
sure.
And I know you were like,
yeah.
But people just have different ways that they are in this world. And I think that don't be scared of saying the wrong thing and then ignore people because you're just scared that you're going to say the wrong thing or do the wrong thing. Like, we have to just treat people as people. I mean, that's the training we give our lawyers. Like, just treat them as your normal paid clients. Like, they're just, it's fine. So yeah, I would say that.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. There was
Yeah.
one other thing I wanted to say, which was, Ellen Sachs is a professor at USC Gould School of Law who wrote The Center Cannot Hold about her experience with schizophrenia. And she will say all the time, oh, if there was a magic pill I could take to get rid of my schizophrenia, I would take it in a second. And she says this in front of audiences of young people with schizophrenia, and they're horrified, because I have other clients who are like, no, my schizophrenia is like what makes me creative and creates my art. And like, I that. So again, it's just a very, you gotta build relationships with people. And that's the only way to really know what people's preferences are.
Yeah. I know the same thing with bipolar disorder, where a lot of people don't want to take their meds because they don't want to lose the highs, even if it means getting rid of the lows. I think that's a wise point too. I find that also when I'm praying with people as a pastor, it's helpful to say, even if you know exactly what's going on in their life, to ask, how can I pray for you? Or what can I be praying for? And sometimes there are things that I think they need that they don't think they need, and I turn that into a silent prayer. But I know that there's people that relates to what Jordan was saying about praying for healing in certain situations, even with illnesses like cancer, where you do pray for healing, where it's different than autism. There comes a point in the decline with illnesses where people don't want to be prayed to heal. And it can be kind of a hurtful thing when someone is on hospice to be praying for healing, when what they desire is a prayer for peace and to know the power of the resurrection, where we can get kind of caught into this worldly, everything needs to work out perfectly in this world, and we lose sight of eternal perspectives, and also end up praying for things that are not desired. But I think that both of you have wise counsel on that. That is, I don't know that we have any else in the chat. Anyone can jump in if they have any pressing questions. But otherwise, I will invite Ellen to pray us out when you're ready. Thank you guys both. I really appreciate
It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
you being
Thank you.
and sharing this with us.
Yeah. Since I've prayed us in, I'm going to ask Darren to pray us out. I wanted to thank everyone tonight for joining us and just letting you know that we're going to take a little break from our series and we'll resume back in the fall. So just stay tuned for information on our next presentation. Darren?
That's called a presentation mic drop. Like what can come next?
Yeah.
Let's take a break. Yeah, let us pray. Lord, I thank you for Jenny and for Jordan and for M. Hawes and the ARC and the important work that you do through those agencies, with some people there doing your work without even knowing that that's what they're doing. I thank you for the concern for justice and for the least of these that you have put on the hearts of Jordan and Jenny and their colleagues. I pray that these people that they work with who have mental illness or disabilities of various kinds, I pray that they would have the power to be respected, to have consequences when they are treated as less than human, that they would have the same rights that we so often take for granted. I thank you that there are people to speak for them, and I pray that you would amplify their voice as well. Lord, we thank you for this series and the chance to think about these either controversial or uncomfortable topics. And we pray that as we focus on important issues like racism and homelessness and violence and the environment and mental health, that you would be shaping our hearts to care about these things at a deep level, and not just to think about them from time to time, but that these concerns would drive every decision that we make. We pray this all in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.
Bye, everyone. Thanks so much. Good being with you.
Thanks, Jay.
Thanks.
Bye, Jenny.
Jenny.
Good seeing you.
You too,
Thank
Jordan.
you all very much.
Yes, thank you. Now, oh, they left already. Okay. Darren,
Yeah.
hold on a minute.